Welcome to Shane Barker's Marketing Madness podcast. I'm your host, Shane Barker. Today, my guest, Brennan White, is going to talk about the visual content and the possibility it opens up for marketing. He is the founder and CEO of Cortex, a company that has developed artificial intelligence solutions for social media marketing. Listen to him as he tells us how AI has the potential to revolutionize social media and what brands can do with it. Where did you grow up at? I mean, you're currently in the Boston area right now, right?
Yes, sir. Grew up in the Boston area as well, so haven't moved too far. The town I grew up in is called Weston, Massachusetts. It's like 15 miles directly west of Boston. So little sleepy town. Most people haven't heard of it, but you might have driven through it on your way to Boston.
Gotcha. And so, I mean, I'm assuming that you're a Bruins fan, you're a Red Sox fan, and that you're a Patriots, or how do we?
Oh, hell yeah.
Sports fan?
Huge sports fan. I'm a giant Pats fan, but all the other teams as well. And my family's actually from New Orleans, so my kind of second tier teams that I root for, like the Saints and things. So this season actually being a phenomenal season for my family. The Pats are almost undefeated. The Saints are 9-2 or 10-2. I forgot the outcome of the game yesterday, but they're both doing very well. Oh, there you go.
I'm a 49ers fan, so we're doing well too, which is a shocker. So used to be in the 80s and 90s, it was awesome, and then there was like 15 years where I was like, damn it, this is terrible. Now we're back. So anyways, good things there. Well, that's awesome. I know I've been out to Boston a handful of times, and I'll tell you would assume that if I wore a Yankees hat that I'd probably get in a fight with about 800 people or something. Like, I know how passionate they are about sports and stuff like that. So, I mean, I would never want to test anybody from Boston when it comes to that, but I just know how passionate you guys are when it comes to sports. So anyways, we want to make sure you were just as passionate.
Yes, sir. Definitely.
Awesome. So how big, like your family, so you were 15 miles, whatever, from Boston. That's where you grew up. How big was your family in Boston?
I have one sister. She's 7.5 years older than me. She actually went to a completely different, she graduated from high school in a different town. Basically end of my elementary school. She goes off to college. We moved to Weston. So actually we went to a different town. It's almost like I was a only child in that town, at least. My Weston friends don't really know my sister too well, interestingly enough. But yeah, just two parents, one sister, very small family. In that even includes my extended family. I've got one cousin, a couple aunts and uncles. Not too much in terms of the numbers on the family, but very, very cool family, mostly based in New Orleans, like I mentioned a moment ago.
Gotcha. So the family reunions are a little smaller.
Yeah. We got one actually coming up right at the end of this year. And they're usually in New Orleans, which is nice. So we get away from the colds. We get some delicious food. We're, Cajun background. So that food is very delicious to us. And always looking for an opportunity. Boston's not really known for the spicy food. So it's a nice break.
No, man, the Cajun food, like, you can't tell me enough about that. Like, any kind of like Creole or anything like that is like over the top. I'm a huge, the food I like is like real, like just tasty food. Like, I want something when I taste, I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. I like that sort of like my beer, my wine, like something that really kind of packs some punch to it. So that's, I can only imagine the food that you guys are having out there for your family reunion. Maybe I'll make it out there one day once I become part of the family or something like that. Who knows?
You are welcome, sir. Let me know.
See,
either New Orleans or Boston. Happy to host.
That's half the reason why I have this podcast. So I get people to commit to things like that, and I have a recording of it. So when I show up, they're going to be like, oh, wow. I mean, I guess I did kind of invite you. And I'm like, I do have it recorded. So let's not make this awkward. Let's go ahead and get those crawfish going. Let's get some beers going and have some fun. So tell us you've already kind of given us some stuff, but any interesting fact growing up? I mean, other than nobody knows that you have a sister. I mean, is there anything else that not really, but is there anything else that's kind of fun, or you're like, oh, nobody knows that, any kind of fun facts?
I'm not really. No, I mean, there's a lot. Yeah. I have an incongruous background. Like, I was a music major in college. A lot of my professional contacts don't know I have that background. That's usually surprising. I played rugby for 8 seasons and was captain of a rugby team and played in England and Australia and stuff. So there's a few of those, but nothing too crazy, nothing like super wild.
That's awesome though, rugby, man. It's so funny. So my son played rugby his last year in high school, and then my wife's brother played rugby forever, like literally forever. He was actually a coach at UNR, at University of Reno, and it played rugby. I mean, men's rugby and all that kind of stuff early on. And I actually, when I went to school in Chico, California. I actually went to a number of schools, but Chico was where I one of the places I ended up opening a bar. But I was actually going to start rugby. I really love the idea of rugby. Of course, it's a learning curve, right? When you jump on, you're like, okay, what do I do? And where do I throw it? And what happens? But the problem is I didn't have insurance. And so they were like, yeah, you don't have insurance, dude. Like, what happens if you get your head cracked? And I'm like, I don't really plan on getting my head cracked. Like nobody does. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe I should get insurance. So anyways, I didn't end up playing. I ended up playing footy, though. This was probably a few years ago. You ever heard of footy, like Australia?
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was fun. I mean, like I said, I'm a very fit.
Violent, right? I mean,
yeah.
That you did
but
that.
I had insurance. I was like, hey, and I was like, and plus I'm assuming that I've probably like lost knowledge over the years. So I'm assuming maybe if somebody jarred something that I would remember something cool, or I don't know. I can't really tell you that there was any benefits or not, but I do love those physical types of sports. I mean, that is something that I kind of like. I don't know, like I was growing up, it was always like, I ran track and I played soccer and did some stuff. My family was like, kind of like, California hippies. So they were like, oh, let's hug it out instead of like, smash each other. And I'm like, I kind of want to smash a little bit. And so anyways, I didn't get into a lot of that stuff till later on in life, but huge fan of rugby, man. It's just a camaraderie and like the way they treat each other and just all that kind of stuff is just an awesome sport.
It's great. It's funny. It kind of works like golf, I guess also works. I don't play golf, but they always talk about how people bond over golf and they have this like secret business network. In my experience, there's like a secret business rugby network that works really well where you meet someone who played rugby, they've got a trophy in the corner of their office or they got like a ball leaning against the wall or something. And you connect over that. You end up being really good. Yeah. Really good, relationship because you've got the connection, and B, I think rugby itself actually lends itself to good leadership if you played a leadership role in the team, because it's like football in that you've got plays and you got to get 15 guys all kind of doing the same thing, but it's live, it never stops or almost never stops. And so you don't really get, you don't have the benefit of football where it's kind of from the same exact position. You're going to have to talk and communicate on the fly. And so I think it actually, breeds kind of good leadership and the ability to think on your feet and make stuff happen. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of rugby players in positions of, cool roles throughout the business world that we kind of end up sniffing each other out one way or another. Yeah, one of my best teammates over the years was a Jesuit guy in high school and played rugby there and went on to actually be in the Super League, which is kind of, at the time, was the best league the U.S. has. Now we've got a major league professional rugby league that just started a couple of years ago. But prior to that, he won the Super League as a super young guy and was a Jesuit guy. So I'm even familiar with that team. So
that's awesome. Yeah. It's, man, talk about a close-knit community. That is one of the things too, on top of the networking. So my wife's brother, Don, his name's Don Padlock, but I'm telling you, he's, the community, he goes into any area and they start talking about rugby. And then all of a sudden they're like, whatever you need, anything. And it is a nice the community's tight, man, which is awesome. So it was nice to see that my son was able to tap into that a little bit on his last year, and once again, kept those connections. So that's cool. But where did you,
you should have him play in a club later.
Yeah. The funny part was I would too, except I hurt my back doing CrossFit, which is a whole nother conversation. And so I'm trying to be a little like, you get older, dude. I'm trying to be, I don't know, I want to do, like, I really want to go in there, but then my body's like, yeah, but you might break your neck or something. I'm like, yeah, that's probably true. So so where did you go to college? Did you go to college in the Boston area?
I went to Vassar College, which is about an hour and a half north of New York City. So it's in the Hudson Valley, just to the west of Massachusetts. So not too far, like 3.5, 4 hours from Boston.
Nice. So, and it's closer to New York City.
Close to New York City, yeah. It's you can just hop on the train as a college kid and be in the city in like an hour and a half. It's pretty convenient for partying and seeing the museums and going out with your friends and all that good stuff. But yeah, I actually played a ton of rugby there too, and so I spent almost every weekend on campus just training and playing games. So didn't really go to the city as much as the average kid there. But it was a really good school for a lot of things. And as I mentioned earlier, music major. So they had a really great music department when I was there. So
that's awesome. And then what? Yeah, I was going to say music. So how was it? You just like, what was your plans for music? I mean, obviously, because you're not doing, well, you might be doing music, but I mean, that's not your professional career. Why music? Just curious.
Well, yeah, people are always kind of thrown off by it. And in hindsight, it seems like an odd choice even to me, ironically enough, being the guy who made the call. But yeah, I mean, to me, growing up in Weston, as I mentioned, they had one of the best public schools in the state, but it didn't have a music department in terms of, there were no music theory classes. You couldn't really learn about music other than, being in choir or band or something like that. And so, when I got to Vassar, one of my passions, was music. But I was, full on going to be a biology major. I'd done really well in the AP bio test and all that stuff, and it kind of just came naturally, biology did. And so, but when I got to Vassar, I took some kind of intro music theory courses and just said, oh my gosh, there's this whole language behind this thing that I really like. And, it just appeals to, like, I've got the creative side and I've got the kind of mathy, nerdy side, and music's kind of like the meeting of those two minds, right? It's absolutely art, but it's also heavily kind of based in numbers. So to me, it just felt really right. And so I just said, you know what? I'm going to go from 0 to 60 and go from literally no experience with this to I'm going to make this my major and do that. And the only thought I gave to a career afterwards was that, I really wanted to compose for film. But, by the time I was done with Vassar, I was already kind of thinking about starting a business and that kind of stuff, and never really looked back. I've done a few little projects for, I worked at an ad agency and stuff for a while. And so, occasionally there'd be a situation where we needed 30 seconds of music for the background of some video or something. And so I got to flex my muscles once or twice, but not very often.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because, you think about it. Like I originally I wanted to be my major. I wanted to be in photography because I really enjoyed photography. But I remember this was in high school. I went to like my counselor and I was like, yeah, I really want to do photography. My counselor was like, yeah, that's not going to work. And I was like, well, what do you mean it's not going to work? Like you're supposed to like kind of motivate me a little bit. It's like, what are you going to do? Like, you going to do weddings? You like weddings? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm 14 years old. I don't never been to that many weddings. And they're like, well, but you can't, like, there's just not a lot of money. And I appreciate that, right? I mean, you don't want to tell people, hey, you can be a photographer. Yeah, you'll make millions. Like, go do it, kid. Then all of a sudden you're like, why am I homeless? So it was like one of those weird things, and now I wish I would have done more photography, not necessarily as my major probably, but like it just kind of dropped off as like a hobby even, because I was like, God, this photography thing just sucks. Like, I just went and had this meeting with my counselor that I see once a year, and boy, he knocked that whole idea down of the whole photography thing. So yeah, I know. So I'm sure the thing with music, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna do music. You're like, wait a second. So how does this thing work on the end? Like, what do I do other than I think, movies and stuff, obviously that makes sense to do that. And you're able to flex a little bit on some stuff. So I guess it was, it worked out. You're where you're at today. And then what was what'd you talk? You talked a little bit about an ad agency. So what was your first job out of college? Like, where did you go from after you graduated?
Yeah, so I always wanted to be an entrepreneur because my dad had actually started an architecture firm, and he just kind of like always kind of preached to me that you don't want to be trading time for dollars and you want to be doing your own thing. And I, was young and impressionable, so I took that to heart. But right out of college, I didn't have any money to start a company, and of course, no connections or anything like that. So, I took on 3 jobs right out of college and just lived at home and saved money. The main job being I was a software sales guy for a tech company, in Boston. And so that was kind of like my first exposure to tech, and it actually was a SaaS company. And so, it was really kind of early in the SaaS world. So that was pretty good. Got some experience selling there. Actually, turns out I was pretty good at it. So I made a decent amount of money, but like at nights I would be a bartender. On weekends I was selling real estate, and I was just trying to save as much money as I could so I could kind of hang my own shingle and do my own thing once I had the right opportunity.
I love that, man. I love it. You grind it like I do. You're like, so during the week I was doing this, and at night, because I used to own a bar. I owned a bar in Chico, so I used to own a bar, and some obviously real familiar. Yeah, the bartender side of things was always, and in Chico was one of the number 1 top 10 party schools in the nation at this time. Like Playboy had mentioned it. So anyways, it was of course the locals were like, oh, it's not that crazy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't remember a lot, but I think I had a good time from what I remember from the pictures. Thank God there was no social media. Let's just put that out there.
Same.
But that's, I'd be like, that doesn't even look like, okay, that's me. That is my tattoo. Okay, that's me. The funny part is, like, I do real estate now. So we flip properties. I have a real estate company called RNS, REI, that we flip properties. So that's funny that there's a lot of parallels there of, I never worked for a SaaS company, but I did do some sales. There was a company I did some sales for. And I think it's kind of funny. So with your, Cortex, that probably was a little bit of a foundation for getting sales going and kind of understanding that whole process, especially in the SaaS business, right?
Yeah, it's funny because, there was like a 8-year gap or so between those jobs and Cortex, where I founded a digital marketing agency and did that, which the sales there is actually quite different. But yeah, the sales skills I learned were probably some of the most valuable skills I have. And then, of course, it helps with the first business but that's a very large sales cycle, high relationship type business. Whereas the SaaS business, Cortex, you can actually, it's very analogous to what we did back then, which is, lots of people coming inbound, trying to get them as much information as possible to make their decision as quickly as possible and as confidently as possible. And so a lot of the stuff we learned, I learned like 12, 15 years ago is now, coming to super relevance and stuff you don't really know at the time is going to end up being really relevant, actually ends up being quite relevant. So it's pretty cool how it all works out.
Yeah, that's, it's funny. I love that. Like when you talk about the foundation, like how people started off, because I always think that's so interesting, right? Like I did, I used to do some like door-to-door sales, and I also worked for a real estate company. I was actually a buddy of mine's, and I would do cold calling, which was terrible. I was like the worst cold caller because everybody else was doing like 600 calls in a week. And they would go, Shane, in your numbers, you did 74 calls. Good job, buddy. And I'm like, and I knew the owner, and I was like, just not a big fan, but I'm surprised they even kept me as long as they did, but it was just because I didn't like the cold calling, but I learned so much from that. Like that was the foundation of like psychology and how you talk to people. I'm calling people during dinner time after they got off work, they're trying to spend time with their family. I'm like, hey, do you want to refinance? And they're like, no, not at all, actually. And I'm like, sounds good. So what's your current interest rate? Like, how do you, it's like this, like, no, I just told you I don't want to do this. Perfect. So you guys had a 4 or 5%, and they're like, well, what? I'm at a 5%, but I really need to go eat with my family. Sounds good. So when was the last time you guys refied? Because with the current, I'm going to this big old thing, and next year you're turning people around, and I'm high-fiving people, So it was interesting on like just the on how to work that, right? On how to like what I learned from there, even though it was the worst. I hated it, but I learned so much from that actual time of like that I apply today when it comes to sales and marketing. So it's kind of cool when you that foundation, when stuff that you don't even think about later on comes back and you're like, okay, wow, that was beneficial.
Yeah, I think, especially on the sales front. And of course, I can't speak to other jobs like right out of college, but I certainly can say that, I think every job, every role, almost every role, especially in corporate America, even if you're not, if you don't have the word sales in your title, I think a sales, especially an entry-level sales role is definitely helpful for exactly what you were talking about. Just getting used to talking to tons of people, quickly assessing their personality type and whether they like, direct information or they want to chat about stuff, and just kind of understanding how to communicate with various people well. I think that is, only a benefit regardless of where you are. Even if you're in IT or something, I think communication skills are huge. And, at the time I had the same feeling as you. I was like, well, this really sucks. I don't want to do this very long.
Yeah.
In fact, actually the impetus to start my agency, my first company, was the guy in the cubicle next to me. I was 23. He was 43. He was divorced and had alimony and everything. And he had my exact job. Exactly. And I said, you know what? 20 years from now, I could be this guy if I don't, get it going. And he did well, not to knock it, but I just knew that I did not like that. And I was like, I can't do this for 20 more years or even 2 more years. So I got to figure this out. So, that
don't be like Bob.
Gave me the fire too.
Don't be like Bob. Yeah, you're looking at him.
His name was actually Bob.
No, shut the front door.
You nailed it. Well done,
man. Look at that. What are the odds? I'm thinking I'm gonna go play the lottery today. Maybe I'll go to Vegas tonight or something. What are the? I was thinking Bob. I literally thought Bob. I was like, oh, do you want to be like Bob? You're like, his name's Bob. I'm like, okay. Just so you guys know out there in the podcast world, we didn't have that planned. That was not something that was planned. I just said Bob. That's what happened. Speaking of Cortex,
I can confirm. I don't think anybody, even like my co-founders and people, I don't think anyone know that guy's name. So there's no way they could have sourced that. That was just pure clairvoyance right there.
I should go on the road. Maybe I have a talent. That could be my hidden talent that I just like kind of tap into people's cortex. I really think the brain, right? There's something there. Interesting. I'll look. Maybe this is a reason why my wife can't leave me, is because I'm always know what she's thinking before she does it. Yeah. Yeah, very interesting. I'm going to have to look into this a little further, but other than the fact that I'm obviously extremely smart, because I'm obviously able to tap into people's brains. Tell me a little bit about Cortex, man. Like, how did you start that company, and like, what was the premise of that? Other than you were looking at Bob and thinking, oh, I just don't want to die in this seat next to Bob. Like, what were you like? What was your deal? Like, when you're like, at what point you're like, okay, hey, like, did you just start Cortex after that, or was there an agency you started, or like, kind of what was the journey?
It was a step between it. Yeah, no, exactly. So the Bob story was the impetus to start something. But the first opportunity was actually a digital marketing agency. In fact, it's called Pandemic Labs. It still exists. It's actually crushing it right now. My co-founder is actually one of my best friends from middle school back in Weston. middle school and high school back in Weston. So, kind of reconnected with him, and he had some experiences that kind of echoed mine, where we said, hey, we were both the class of '05 in college, which if you figure, do the math, we were the first class that was on Facebook, in college. So we were, he was at a different school than me, but we both were in that initial, 20 schools that, could be on Facebook before the general public. So we had this experience, using social as like users. And then, as 23, 24-year-olds, you say, hey, businesses are going to want to use this. And, you see people kind of taking stabs at YouTube or early Facebook before there were brand pages, or right when Twitter launched, and trying to figure that out and saying, they need a young person who actually uses this stuff to translate for them. And so that's actually where the agency came from. And Pandemic Labs was specifically to help people use social. In fact, as far as we can tell, we're the first social media marketing agency in the U.S. And so we were kind of a little too early. We started in early 2007, and, the market didn't really pick up till 2009, let's say. But, we were doing that. And that when the market did turn around, we'd already had some deals with, Puma and Dunkin' Donuts and stuff. And so we're kind of like the only game in town. And that led to, big booming business for creating content, for ads and social and all that stuff. And that's where Cortex came from. So, if you can imagine, we're working with the big Fortune 500 brands kind of globally, and we're seeing the same exact problem at every company, at every level, which is that whether we're talking television ads or online video or social or any of that stuff, as long as there are visuals involved, there's an entire guesswork. This entire thing is predicated on somebody guessing a piece of content, doing their best effort to create something cool that they hope the audience will like, and then some CMO somewhere, kind of rubber stamping and saying, I don't know what's going to work, but I got to try something, And so, for me, from my perspective as the agency, who's kind of, we're on the hook for the success of all this, it was really hard to repeatably be successful. Although Pandemic was and still is quite successful at that. The kind of impetus came out of trying to solve that underlying problem, right? There are a lot of ad tech out there that does a lot of specific ends of the funnel things, but the thing we were trying to deal with was, how do you predict the performance of these visuals, whether it's an image, whether it's a video? Because if you could do that, then you can invest with confidence across all of these different channels, and exactly, should I put half my budget here, or should I create, if I'm going to go do a photo shoot for this brand, what should be in the photo shoot, and how should we make this series of photos look different to hit the audience we want, right? Those were the questions we were consistently asking. And when we failed, that's effectively how we failed over and over and over again. So when we went to, when that's happened to you the 50th time, you kind of go, wait a second, this is the same damn problem. Can we solve this? And luckily for us, Boston is we're basically next door to MIT. There's a lot of smart kind of technologists around here. So you can very quickly say, hey, does anyone know how to solve this problem? What technology should we be using? That kind of thing. Is my business partner and I, neither of us were the tech ones. We were both business guys. And so we connected with some guys in Boston very quickly that happened to be machine learning guys that, said, oh yeah, this is a perfect machine learning problem. We can do this. And then we were off to the races. And as you said earlier, that's basically like 4.5 years ago.
So it's crazy. So it's funny. So you're like, a lot of the stuff that you do is like early. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna say too early, but like, right, like, which is crazy. I mean, if you think, because there are things. I'm gonna give you an example. Like, I think it was, I can't remember the name of the company, but like Safeway, it's pretty much Safeway, and they wanted to deliver groceries, and they were like the biggest startup that failed because they got whatever it was, $1 billion, whatever the number was, and they wanted to deliver groceries, and it was just too early for the concept. And now Safeway and there's other companies that are doing that. Now we have the shared economy, and there's all kinds of other stuff. And I'm not saying you guys aren't gonna make it because you guys are doing phenomenally well, but it's just interesting because you're like, I think we were the first social media agency here in, whatever you said, 1942. Not really. It was like 2007. But like a long time ago, right? And the same thing with Cortex. Like, we look at this and we go, oh, okay, like what you're talking about is saying, hey, like, let's predict what piece of content is going to produce the right types of outcomes, right? Which is is something, that's the hardest part of marketing, right? They always say, like, I know 50% of my marketing is working. I just don't know which 50%.
So I was going to say, that is the quote that everyone quotes, and you're exactly right. The conclusion everyone draws from that, I think, has traditionally been the wrong conclusion. And that's basically why we created Cortex, because the conclusion was, well, we got to track things better, right? Which is certainly true. And we do have to track things better, and we're still kind of like embarrassingly bad, I think, as a industry at tracking lots of parts of marketing, at least. Some of it, of course, is quite good nowadays. But the other thing you could draw right there is you could say, well, if marketing itself is this big question mark in terms of, investment, because that question is effectively what a CMO is asking themselves every day. It's like, I've got this, I got $100 million to spend next year, and I really don't have a lot of confidence in where to put it. And the question we could have asked ourselves after that is, well, why is that? Which the answer is, well, because all of it currently has this big question mark opinion, bullshit in the middle that is creating the content, right? And so if we'd looked at that, if other people had looked at that a little bit differently, they certainly would have come to the same conclusion we did, which is that, there's this big question mark in every single process when it comes to marketing and advertising. If we solve for the question mark, right, all of a sudden we'll have a much, much higher level of confidence in what we're doing across any of the channels if we can figure out what the content's going to do in advance. And so, that was us kind of just taking a look, taking a step back and saying, this appears to be the problem, all these different companies and all these different industries, and, it can't be, just us. So that was the risk we took. And you're exactly right. We're like, I guess 2 for 2 at least. I'm too early. If I ever do this again, I will wait a few years. Because the early part's tough. The early part is tough. But so far, both of them have done fairly well. So
because the thing is
later.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is like you're blazing the trail, which is awesome, but it also sucks because we've also done that. I mean, I've had companies in the past that I've owned where I'm like, this is awesome, nobody else is doing this, and I'm like, God, this really sucks, nobody else is doing this, right? Because you've got to educate everybody, you got to tell the world, right? So it's like it's awesome, and then like we talked about earlier in the podcast, you said you were at an event, I think you were speaking at an event, and everybody was looking at you like, God, this is awesome that he's speaking in Chinese. I just don't know what he's saying, right? Like really, which when you were explaining what it was, because people are like so crazy. But when you think about it, it's not crazy. I guess it is crazy in the sense that we're like, you're saying, hey, I can tell you guys which content is going to bring you the better outcome, right? Which is like the mecca, right? That's like, it doesn't get any better than that. Like who doesn't want to know that? I mean, I want to know, I'm going to produce 10 pieces of content, which ones are going to have the higher likelihood for being successful, because then I don't hopefully have to do the other 2 or 3 or 4, or at least I know what kind of content's going to resonate the best, and the reason why that's based off of data, right? And that's for the creative side, the visual side of things, whether it be pictures or video, I think it's phenomenal. I think it's almost crazy, like, right? It almost sounds a little crazy.
Yeah, and especially because I think a lot of people are high-level thinkers, which I think is actually good. And I think they think humans are creative, and I haven't seen a computer or software be creative. Therefore, it's up to us to be creative. Therefore, there's no way to track it, right? They're kind of thinking in high-level abstract, which is useful, and I think in general is a good way to think. In this case, though, the way AI is taking over things, not marketing, not only marketing, but everything, is that, people hear the word AI, the phrase AI, they think like, C-3PO or somebody like that, or Data from Star Trek. They think something that's very human-like and has like a broad range of capabilities. Like a Data from Star Trek can move around, he can see, he can talk, he can hear, he can also process lots of data. But actually AI in the real world, the way it's taking over our lives today, is via these super narrow capabilities. So it's absolutely reasonable to say humans are the only things capable of doing creativity today. That's super reasonable. But even 2 years from now, it's absolutely reasonable to say, the totality that I think of as creativity is only doable by humans. But between now and then, little pieces of what you previously might have called creativity, now you're just going to say, oh, software does that. And in our case, it's looking at millions of images, processing it all with machine vision, knowing exactly what colors are being used, what objects are in the image, whether they're humans in the image, what age they are, what gender they are, where they're located, all that stuff, and using a different type of machine learning to find the patterns, right? That's something that, humans could kind of do unofficially now. You could kind of get a sense for the patterns. You could hire a team and try to manually do that. But, software is just really, really much, much, much better than humans at that one tiny piece of creativity, right? And so you lose, let's say 5 years from now, everyone's doing it our way, just that little piece of it. You won't really think of that as creativity anymore. You say, okay, software does that better, but we do this, right? And so over time, you're just kind of like software is getting better at a narrow piece and biting that off, and then another narrow piece and biting that off, and then eventually what we once thought of as creativity, half of that is going to be done by software, and the other half still going to be in the human hands, and the humans would be much, much better because the things that, the inputs into what they do, when you go to make an ad campaign, if you go into that creative process knowing the colors you should be using, what the audience likes to see, what kind of humans should be in it to make the audience happy, where the ad campaign should take place, all those kinds of things, right? That just makes your creative process much more successful. And so it's cool because you're exactly right. Kind of people, when they think at a high level, they're like, well, this is human stuff. How does human stuff get automated? From a big perspective, they're right. I don't think creativity will ever go away, and I don't think creative jobs really will ever go away. But these individual things that make up what we currently consider to be creativity, those will be done and are currently being done, as you can see with us, via software and AI. And so it's pretty cool, and I think it sneaks up on you in terms of kind of where the automation is going to happen and how it's going to affect the day-to-day.
So just to break this down, so is the goal of Cortex to get rid of all the humans? Just kidding. No, I'm just kidding you. No, I'm totally kidding you. Totally kidding you. No, I think what you said is awesome because you're like, wait a second, what just happened? No, I think what's awesome about what you said, all joking aside, is that I love it because it's like, okay, let's say there's 20 things that happen in this process. And AI or machine learning can take care of one or two more things, right? And maybe 3 things and maybe 4 things. But there will be things that I would say maybe not in our lifetime, and maybe that's not true, that will be able to take over 18 of those 20 things, right? But for now, it's like the way that humans work in the process, but it's no different. Let's give you an example. Like, let's say SEO, right? So in the beginning, you'd look up keywords and you kind of do this, you kind of do that, and then you have some software that now you can look it up a little better. Now, that's not AI or machine learning, but the idea of it is that there still takes some eyeballs, right? You can look at these reports, you can do all this stuff, but that just makes it easier to be able to put this stuff together. And it's the same thing with this. It's like, exactly. We're going to take care of these little things that you might not look at as a headache, but these are things that we're going to make it easier for you to be able to put together the pieces of the puzzle for you to make that decision as a human, let's say, right? So I think that's really, the way that you explained it, I think is, it's palatable, right? Because if not, you go, hey, we have these machines and they're going to look at a few colors and they're going to tell you which one works, and people go, whoa, that sounds freaky. Like, what about, like, I mean, am I involved? Am I not involved? Like at what point, I just see Will Smith coming down and then like, just take all the humans and put them in back. And you're like, oh God, but wait, I have some ideas. Like, no ideas from the humans, just give it to the machines, So I think people freak out about that. But really at the end of the day, the way you explained it is like, to me, that makes sense. Like, that makes sense of like, it's just going to make things easier, right? We're here to take a look at things that maybe you might process with your brain. You look at and you go, I think they like this, think like this. But we as humans I can't take in 10,000 pieces of data, process it, and then say, hey, this is what we're getting, right? And that's where I think the efficiencies happen.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'll give you a real world example. One of our customers is a big consumer products company, hair care, skin care, things like that. And they did an initial analysis with Cortex. One of the kind of gateway drugs we sell is a visual vocabulary report. That's the name of the product. And it's made for people who are not ready to jump in with both feet, who are probably a little hesitant, like you described. They don't necessarily want to invite an AI to the party yet. They're not sure what that means. This is a PDF. They can take it, they can leave it, they can share it. It's really easy. It's not threatening. But what it does do is it shares hundreds of different trends and creative choices that they can test, and it predicts how the creative choices will impact the performance. And so one of the trends, or two of the trends that they saw were color trends. One of which was about pink, and it showed that this kind of specific type of pink, and it actually gives you the exact hex code, right? Because we're not dealing with humans, we're dealing with a software's ability to be super duper accurate. It gives you the exact hex code of a kind of light shade of pink. It said this pink is 19% performance better, will add 19% to your performance. And then later in the in the kind of findings, it had a slightly darker shade of pink and that hex code for that. And it said that this pink will detract, I forgot the number, it was like 18 or 17, it was a similar number, but on the negative side from performance. And they said, wait a second. So just by changing our images from this darker shade of pink to this lighter shade of pink, we captured the delta, so like 35+% in performance. And, that's effectively what Cortex is telling them, that by making this slight color choice, to their ads and their content, they're going to make a huge impact and performance down the line. And the cool part was they shared with us that they'd tried to do a color analysis before. And because humans can't really see at the pixel level and can't really see necessarily reliably between, the light pink and the dark pink, and they wouldn't know exactly where to draw the line anyway when they were doing this campaign, they did effectively, when they did their own analysis, they did like the 12 colors that you get in the crayon box. They did one pink, they did one red, they did one blue, et cetera. And so their analysis about pink was that it was roughly a neutral color, right? And so they said, pink's, about zero. It doesn't really have an impact on performance. Let's move on and look at other colors, right? But it turns out there's actually two stories in the pink, and there's no way that they could have known that in advance without a software, right? And again, when you get back to the human question, you're like, are the humans on that team less valuable to the company now, or are they more valuable to the company now, right? Now that they know, they can make those changes across all their designers, across their photographers, across their campaigns, and all of a sudden, the company performs better simply because the AI kind of cost them one, and that's just an example of kind of one change. Of course, it's looking at thousands of these things and communicating them all very quickly and easily. And back to that story you're kind of getting at, that's the crux, right? Is that in every case where automation, screw AI, right? In every case where automation has appeared, the worker has become more valuable to the company, not less, right? When we went from manually assembling Ford Model Ts on an assembly line, one person doing each screw, to wow, there's 5 employees for the whole car assembly because a lot of it's automated. Those humans are responsible for much more value delivered than the 1,000 humans it took before. And it's the same story here, even though the word we're talking about is AI. It's the same exact story that, when your marketer gets more reliable, when they're providing more value as a CEO or a CMO, that division gets more of your budget, not less. So, we're not really seeing anybody automating away jobs with it.
No, that makes sense. I think the biggest, what is the, I'm going to switch this up a little bit. What is the biggest hurdle that you're seeing because it really comes down to, I think, how do you get a big company to commit to something like that? Because I think when you say it, it makes sense, but it's and I know that you guys have been doing this for about 5 years, right? I mean, you guys were way ahead on this whole thing, but it's interesting to me because I would think if I was a company, I go, okay, that makes sense. But then what do and I think you already kind of touched on it a little bit, you have these steps to kind of reel them in, let's say, right? And educate them. You can look at this, and then you go, okay, that's kind of cool. That wasn't real expensive. Oh, now I tried this. Okay. And then you get them to a point where you're like, man, this is changing the game. I could imagine that for the last 5 years of trying to convince people to do this, because even today, it's still kind of I think it's phenomenal, but it's still a little bit ooh, I know you have a lot of good case studies and stuff, but it's still I'd be a little bit worried, but I would think once they drink the juice and realize, hey, this is awesome, you'd have people signing up all day long.
Well, yeah, actually that's been the case. So the first 3 years, let's say, were definitely hard, and we're certainly learning and kind of missionary selling, as you say, kind of saying, hey, this exists, try us out. But that's changed dramatically in the past year. Now, most major brands out there are looking for something like this and are coming to our door. 95% of our revenue, probably more of it now, is inbound, right? We don't have to, I don't have that, cold calling job like I used to anymore. It's all coming to us, which is great. But to answer your first question, there's basically 3 steps of maturity that we see. And we've built a product for each step, right? So if you come to us and you're
perfect.
I've heard of this, but I don't really know what's going on, we have that thing I mentioned, the visual vocabulary, which is effectively a taste, right? And it's not scary. You're not committing to anything. It's a one-off. You can take it and run with it. You can never call us back. It's there for you to look cool internally and to shop around the decision makers and to kind of make you look awesome. And then usually that leads to the second step, which is now that you have all this data that you've then tested and kind of waved around internally that told you all these new trends, now you probably want to commit to that data as part of your process. That's stage 2. We got a product for that effectively just a lot more data in more readily available fashion. And then stage 3 is, let's say you're a company that has tasted the data, you've seen the impact that it has, you've built your process around it. Now you want to optimize the use. You want to guarantee that kind of the data is everywhere that it needs to be, that we're taking maximum value from this data. We have a platform that is a fully operational SaaS platform that not only tells you the data, but also automates a lot of decisions for you, right? Because if you think about this, where this is going, if Cortex knows the colors that your audience likes, and it knows what should be in the images, and it knows all these creative choices, and it knows them by platform and by time of day and all these things, because it's using clustering to compare all of those inputs to find patterns, right? So it'll know, let's say, next Friday that your audience is most likely to engage with a piece of content that is a picture of your alcoholic product on the beach with these certain colors in it. It also can then plug directly into your digital asset manager and find that image for you and get it ready, right? It doesn't have to just tell you. It can actually just go do it. And so our platform kind of at the top tier, it already does that, right? It plugs into digital asset managers. We've got a partnership with Getty Images. It plugs into stock. So it basically tries to fulfill your content calendar automatically way in advance and do all the planning and strategy for you, kind of built on all that data. And so it's basically, you're exactly right. There's people at every stage of sophistication, but we've solved that by kind of giving them the right medicine at each stage.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is like I said, drinking the Kool-Aid, but that's what it is, right? You got to kind of like ease them into it, because I'll be honest, like what you're saying is awesome, right? But I can imagine that like that first step of like, okay, so you guys are going to like feed me this, and it's like, and that's going to work. Because the thing is this is what's awesome about it is like what we've done in the past doesn't work, right? Just staring at something and saying, well, I read this article and I heard that green is really good for SaaS companies, right? You're like, where'd you get that from?
Right.
Well, I read an article on ShaneBarker.com, and Shane said that green is really good for SaaS companies. And Shane actually is also a speaker at events. I think Shane is a color specialist, or maybe he's not. We're not sure, but let's use green, right? Like there's really nothing behind that, right? I mean, other than,
Exactly.
if you read my blog, please, everything I write on there is 100% true. And I am, just kidding. Not probably 100. Well, it is true. But anyways, you get my point of like, it's like, what is the data behind that, right? Like, how do we, like, other than what we feel or we kind of think, like you guys are taking the guessing game out of that, like, and providing that, which is like, I don't know, man. Like, I can't believe you guys did this 5 years ago and you guys are still around. Because I can imagine those 3 years was just grueling. Because, I mean, even now it's still a little like, wow, that's pretty crazy. Like 3 years ago, people are like, I don't know. Like, it's just something else.
What is this shit? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Yep,
man, like, okay, I
much.
get it, but man, this is a little freaky. Like, you really tell me you can do this? And then how is it having people like that on your team? Like, because you said you don't do machine learning, so you have somebody on your team that does. Like, I can only imagine your meetings, like when the people are like, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be able to predict like how much revenue we're going to have in 30 days because of this, 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 and this. And all you have to do is look into this and you taste this and lick this. And then all of a sudden, well, the numbers, and you're like, God, machine learning is amazing. Like, it's just nuts, man. Like I know enough about machine learning, not that I could implement it or, go do software or anything, but like I've actually, studied up on it on like just the background of it. And it's just absolutely like floors me. It's just like crazy to me.
Yeah, it's really exciting because, frequently it's us directed. It's stuff that we knew from the last company and that we've been hearing from the customers that, we want to be able to do. And we go to the tech guys and we're like, this is the mission. Let's do that. But, increasingly now we've kind of checked all the basic boxes of what we thought we needed to build. And now it's them saying, hey, did you know we can predict this? And we going, what?
Yeah.
That's incredibly valuable. Can we put that in the product tomorrow? Like, that's incredible. So it is a pretty exciting process. You're exactly right. And, part of it is like they have PhDs and they've gone deep on this and we haven't. But part of it is like this stuff is evolving relatively quickly across all fronts. So like, for example, if Google put out tomorrow some crazy image processing capabilities that we don't have now, you could look at an image and look at the angle of the sun and figure out the exact time it was taken. I'm making this up, but let's say they could do that.
Yeah.
We could just immediately deploy that to make our data set more accurate and better, right? And so that's effectively what's happening every day. Somebody rolls out this new thing that we can just bolt on to the processing part at the beginning of our process when we gather the data and process it. And that just makes us better at predicting because, the data set's more enriched. And so it is a really cool time because, as we go, these guys, of course, are kind of nerding out on it just for fun all the time and professionally, but also for fun. And they'll be like, hey, this thing just came out. Let's test it and see what it does. And it turns out now we can predict this other thing that unlocks, X more % performance for our customers. And so now it's in the phase where it's really cool like that, like kind of exactly like you're describing.
I mean, I would think it's like I know like Apple. I mean, I don't know this, but I kind of know this. Like, you know, Apple comes up obviously with things that's the future, right? The Apple, 27 is going to have this, and this, right? And maybe not 27, like 15. So we have these things because you can't go too far ahead where the tech doesn't keep up with that, right? So whatever that is, and I would have to imagine like you have these meetings and your guys are like, hey, we can implement this, do this, and you're like, dude, that's not till 2022. Like, they still have to grasp onto what we're doing now, right? Like, I really feel like there's probably these guys are geeking out and having the time of their lives of figuring out some really cool stuff that you're like, I can't even write something about that right now because I think it would blow people away. I think people wouldn't fully get it. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know, man. It's like, it's really exciting. I can only imagine your meetings. I wish I was a fly on the wall on some of the stuff you guys were talking about because I'm sure I would just leave there. My nose would be bleeding with just my brains coming out and going, oh my God, that was absolutely amazing. Just cool stuff, man. You guys have got some cool stuff going on.
Well, thanks. Yeah, next time you're in Boston, come on by. We'll host one specifically for you.
It might be sooner than later. Be careful. I'm a big fan of Boston. Long story short, actually, I was either going to move to Boston or Chico. Like after I saw Good Will Hunting, I talked about this on another podcast, but love that movie, Good Will Hunting. I don't know why. I was like, I'm going to go to Boston. My mom's like, over at Chico, that's an hour and a half away. I was like, yeah, I'm going to move to Boston. She's like, all right, sounds good. Anyways, that's a whole nother conversation. So tell me about I want to talk about a little bit about like a content. Are there any companies that you look at, like they're creating like epic content, or maybe even a client that you guys maybe tie into that? Because I don't want to say like, just look at something and say they're creating epic content, or is there any like evaluations you guys have done and said this company is like, they seem to like know what's going on when it comes to certain types of content, or do you have a client or somebody? I just want to kind of tap into like somebody that maybe somebody could look up and go, wow, this is, kind of get a better idea, I guess.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So to take one step back first, if you think about what we're talking about, we've kind of talked about it from the brand/marketer perspective, but if you put the other hat on, we're talking about making content that the consumer wants. First,
yeah.
Right. And we're talking about this is a technology that allows you to know what the consumer likes. And so it allows you, of course, then to create content the consumer wants. And if you choose to do that, then of course you're way ahead of the game. Yes, there are several examples, kind of on a spectrum. By far and away, the most committed to that vision is Red Bull. As I'm sure we're familiar, right? They're a drink company, but they have an entire division that is self-sufficient financially, that is literally just running cool events that their audience would like to look at. Yeah, exactly. Right. They put a guy into space so he could jump out of space and parachute down. They do all those weird, like boats jumping off of platforms into water, things like all those events. But they completely committed to the idea that giving the consumer something that the consumer values is the point, right? And then they kind of literally their company is divided into the drink part and the content part. So they've completely committed to this, and as you can see that they're never going to run out of stuff to talk about. They're never going to not be constantly in the media, and of course their drinks do quite well. And so I think they're probably the best example, simply because they've effectively created a media company to service that vision. And they did it back when it was still guesswork, right? Nowadays they probably are more sophisticated. I don't know if they're using AI like we are, and if they aren't, they should call us. But I mean, but ultimately, like they committed to it with both feet, and of course it shows.
Another thing is about Red Bull, and I don't know if I remember I read a book on this, and they talked about Red Bull. And I thought this was interesting because I think this was maybe 10 years ago, whenever they started up. I remember going to like festivals and events and music festivals, and they were handing them out like hotcakes, like couldn't get them out of there. I mean, $4 a piece, and they're handing out thousands of these. I remember thinking, God, that's kind of an interesting concept. Like you just not even, I remember these pretty girls just handing them out like this. I mean, like hundreds of them at a time. And so I'm like, I remember thinking, God, what's the point of that? And I just kind of whatever. And so I started reading this book, and they talked about what they did. What Red Bull would do is the psychology of Red Bull, obviously, is you're getting some kind of a endorphin rush, right? You get something where you're drinking it and you're kind of this heightened sense. Well, you're also at a concert or a music festival. You're seeing your favorite artist, right? So you're having the best time of your life. You're drinking Red Bull. So you're tying in that experience with your Red Bull. So it's amazing. So they would hand these things out. So you have whatever, 10,000 people that are drinking Red Bull, whatever the number is, 1,000, watching their favorite artist, having the time of their life, there with their girlfriend, and they're thinking about Red Bull. So every time they will go to a market or someplace, they see a Red Bull, they think about the experience. So it directly tied back in. So they were at these events, and they couldn't hand out enough of them. Because once again, you tie in, your brain goes, man, I had a phenomenal experience there, and it's tied into that Red Bull. And when I read that, I was like, God, that's brilliant. Because at first I was like, I just don't understand how you're getting any value from this, because you're just handing them out. Like, you don't really know if they're going to drink them again. But they were playing on the game of like, hey, your brain's going to tie into that, which I thought was brilliant. So that was one of the things. Red Bull's phenomenal. They're mainly a media company. Like, they're literally a media company that sells drinks. Like, that's what it is.
Yeah,
right? I mean,
exactly. I mean, and that's the funny thing is, whether the brands have realized it or not, almost every consumer brand has to think that way now. There's so much content. The average brand is creating 15,000 pieces of content per year, just to be competitive, on social and all these different things, all in.
Crazy.
And if you rewind 25 years, right, back in let's say the 80s, right before the internet entirely, right, they were creating a few dozen commercials a year, a few dozen ad spots in magazines, a few dozen print. We're talking maybe on the order of a few hundred pieces of content, which over the past 30, 40 years is now 15,000 pieces of content. So they are media companies, whether they think of it or not, right? And so getting smart about that, like Red Bull just got in front of it and leading the way. And, companies even like Tesla, right? They're not set up like Red Bull is. They haven't jumped in that regard, but they know, as you can tell, like they know that the best thing they can do, the thing their audience wants, is tidbits of videos or content about these cool new futuristic products, right? And so even though they're very product focused and they haven't done what Red Bull did and build a giant division, they spend almost nothing on marketing Tesla, but they're actually philosophically very similar, and that like they lead with their story and they lead with, we're building the future and here's a glimpse at all this cool futuristic stuff. And I think, even though they're very, in terms of their spend, they're kind of the exact opposite of Red Bull, I'd still put them in that category of a company who like totally gets it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think any kind of a launch they do is always people just lose their minds, right? And the amount of orders they put in, like just recently the one they did with the Cybertruck and that, and everybody's like, oh, when he broke the window and this and I'm like, yeah, but at the end of the day, they got millions and billions of dollars in sales. Like it doesn't, it's like the things that he brings out and the price point and the amount of thought they put into it. It's one of those, like, I look at these and I go, why hasn't anybody else come up with this? Like, it's so weird to me, but he saw that there was a need there, right? When it comes to the electronic cars or now the cyber ones, and there's just, flamethrowers, all this, the other companies, these guys, just interesting stuff, man, because it's just like content that people love, man. They like crave it, like we talked about, it's like that craving of like, God, I can't wait for Tesla to come out with this next thing or whatever that is. The same thing with Red Bull. Like, what's their next video going to be? Like, what are they going to do? They're going to jump out of what you said, jump out of the moon or whatever it is and, come down and live stream the whole damn thing. So it is interesting, like that kind of content. And once you know what kind of content your audience likes, to produce more content like that, right? And kind of have that strategy in place.
Yeah, so, we haven't done any analysis of Tesla cars or anything, but I would absolutely predict that recent Cybertruck does exceedingly well, simply because it took a stance from a design point. Right? In the car world, as we've seen, almost every car kind of tries to hide in the middle and look just like all the other cars. In fact, during their presentation, if you saw, they took the logo off of all the major selling pickup trucks, and you really can't tell them apart. They all look basically identical, functionally the same. And the fact that they took a stance here aesthetically. Right, they're certainly not going to appeal to the masses, but they don't need to appeal to the masses, right? To be one of the biggest selling trucks of the year, they sell 100,000, 200,000 of those, and they're off to the races, right? And so they did kind of like and I don't know what kind of research they did, if they did AI, or if this is entirely Elon Musk guessing, and probably guessing well, but they're making a choice, and they're saying, this is what we think our audience wants. Let's go aggressively in that direction, which most companies don't really have the balls to do, so to speak.
They're pre-selling the vehicles. I mean, think about that. Like it's like crowdfunding. Like, let me go ahead and put this out here as a concept. Let me go ahead and get 10,000 orders ahead of time, and now I've got funding. Like it's this crazy thing. Like you don't ever see Ford go, hey, we're coming out with the Ford Explorer, we're gonna do a launch, and everybody goes, oh my God, the Ford Explorer, I'm gonna buy one. Nobody says that,
exactly,
right? Like this is like, we're like, hey, you can go buy them off Tesla right now, and people are like losing their minds and like, I bought one, it's only $40,000, and this is awesome, I'm gonna get it in 6 months, and you're like, this is crazy. Like it's just nuts, man. I love it. Like I could talk about Tesla for like 10 days, but that's the thing, is I think they build up, and Apple's the same way. I think Apple has that kind of like, when they get together and get excited about things and get people kind of pumped up. And but I know I asked you about a few companies. I want to talk to you about a few more things. We're getting at the end of this podcast, but I wanted to talk to you about like MadCon 2020. Like you actually you spoke? It wasn't MadCon, I think, that you spoke at this year.
I don't believe we've spoken there yet, but we're speaking there next year.
That's gotcha. So you got that. You're speaking there next year. So I know that you're a keynote speaker. What is your presentations that you do? Is it mainly about Cortex? I mean, it's got to be about educating the public about this. I mean, that's got to be the main part of your speeches.
Yeah, it's almost like cheating from a keynote speaker standpoint because we don't really have to talk about ourselves at all. We can go into every single presentation having just processed a bunch of data, either about companies we know will be in the audience or industries that, if it's an industry conference or whatever. The one I was at Thursday was in Belgium, and it had, I went in there and we processed the entire beer industry because Belgians, of course, are very passionate about their beer and they do beer quite well. So we went in there and shared a bunch of, I kind of gave them the heads up about what AI is doing in marketing, the high levels, and said, screw me talking about this. Let's get down to it and I'll show you some stuff. And we just go through a bunch of trends. A bunch of you work in the beer industry. You should apply these colors. You do these, make these changes, blah, 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 blah. And then we went into a small little sub-industry of furniture stores just in Belgium and Denmark and the Netherlands because there were a bunch of those people in the audience. And then we looked at one company, which was Deloitte, and we just looked at their Belgian office and was like, this is what your Belgian office should change to target their marketing more. And we kind of went through that as a presentation, and it's super visual. Jesus. It gives them immediate takeaways. And of course we can do it, at the push of a button. So super easy, just, the day before or 2 days before to kind of get the companies from the guy running the event and say, who's going to be in the audience, who should we tailor this to, process all of that and share it. And so
I love it.
Yeah, it's really easy. Yeah.
That is cheating. That is absolutely. I'm so mad at you right now. That absolutely is cheating. That is so not fair to the other people. I'm a keynote speaker, and that kind of pissed me off. But super excited about that. I mean, that's insane. Like the fact that you tie that in your presentation, and people are reading that, and they're like, "I'm at." Wait a second. He just talked about he just gave some suggestions. Right? We should probably write this down. Right? And then I can only imagine that people afterwards are like, "Hey, thanks for the tidbit. Like, what's the next steps?" Well, God, that's awesome, man. And now I'm envious. Now we're going to have to talk more about that because I'm doing a lot of keynote stuff in 2020. So I'm going to get in the minds of the people. I'm going to be able to mesmerize them more and be able to know what colors I need to use. So, all right. So we're getting to the end of this thing.
I'll commit here in recording. If you have an event that you're really excited about and you want some trends, you come back to me with at least a week's notice and we'll get you a bunch of trends and you'll look awesome.
I'd say this is the thing. One thing is for me to look awesome. It's going to take a lot, but hopefully that will work. So one thing is the presentations, and the other thing is that obviously I'm going to let my wife know that we're going to start coming to your family reunions. I mean, I feel like this was good, man. I mean, at this point, I feel like we're like really close. Like our families are going to be close. I couldn't be any better, except we are, which this is the hard part. This is the part that becomes very stressful because this is the part where we're going to have to break up because we're sneaking up on that hour mark. But I have a few more small questions for you. I know this is the hard part. But I'll see you at the family reunion. It's not a big deal. Like we're going to be together forever at this point.
Catch you for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I mean, I'll see you guys in a few days. This is awesome. I'll tell my wife to get the tickets. This will be awesome. So, what if you could? Because the way that your brain works, this is going to be an interesting question. So, if there was 3 people, dead or alive, that you could have dinner with, who would that be? I'm always intrigued by this because you, with your background of music, but yet you biology, but yet you're now seeing the future through machine learning. An interesting background, so I'm curious on what 3 people, dead or alive, would you have dinner with?
Ooh, that's really good. Dead family members aside, because I think you could certainly answer that with all your, family members that you met.
For sure.
I think it's more interesting if we keep it to, people that everyone knows. And I certainly, there's a whole 20 musicians, of course.
I'd want to sit
with. I'll throw Thelonious Monk out there as amazing jazz pianist, but actually he would not be on my list. I think for this purpose, where I'm at with my life and, kind of my responsibilities to Cortex and things, I think they'd all be helpful on that front. I think Elon Musk, actually, not to sound like a fanboy this entire thing, but
I get it.
I think if you think about it, if my goal is to kind of level up my own software, I think you spend a dinner with him and you just kind of, because not to compare ourselves in the slightest, but he attacks every problem at its root, right? He says, what's the problem with this? Let's create much, much cheaper rockets so that we can become a multiplanetary species. What does it take to do that? I'm going to go do that. And he successfully does that, right? And that is, I think, something that everyone can learn from. Of course, I wouldn't want to take too much of his time. He's saving the world. So maybe we do
Yeah.
fast food. But the other two, I would say another one to level up my own software would be Eisenhower, because again, you never know what to trust in historical things. But I've read quite a few biographies of him, and he seems to be a very wise person,
Yeah,
right? And
for sure.
to contrast Elon Musk with the kind of raw brain power, seems like Eisenhower always made, maybe not always, but very, very frequently made the right call, even in a tough scenario.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of want to know how, like what is this process to kind of weigh the urgency versus the importance versus whatever, and how to make tough calls, in some of the toughest scenarios out there, during the Cold War and World War II, all that good stuff. And like, I don't know if you're familiar with his like smoking stories. Are you familiar with that?
It rings a bell, but I don't know the specific story.
Oh, well, yeah, he just used to be a smoker, kind of like everybody in that generation was pretty much a smoker, especially people in the war. And then he came back and he got sick and he had like a heart attack or something. I forgot the impetus. But one day he decided to stop smoking. And rather than what everyone else would have done, which is like throw everything out and tell all their friends, he kept cigarettes in his breast pocket for the rest of his life and never touched them again. And the only reason he would ever touch them is to lend them to people when they asked for one. And he said the reason he did that is because he was reminded of the victory every time he didn't grab it himself. And to me, it's just like, well, that's just exceedingly badass. I'm not sure I trust
awesome.
myself in that scenario. So, that kind of thing, just learning from that. And then I guess the third guy would be a really, rather than kind of leveling up my software in general, third guy would be really specific case. Mark Benioff from Salesforce. Specifically because he created a category that didn't exist before. And he basically, helped create or created cloud and SaaS and CRM, basically. I wouldn't want to give him all the credit for all three of those, of course, but he defined a lot of those categories that weren't categories before, and Cortex is attempting to do that. You heard me. We could have defined ourselves as a marketing software, or we focus on lots of different types of marketing, but realistically, we're focused on creativity and visuals, and there really isn't a category for software that focuses on something that fundamental yet. And so we're, in addition to your whole point about the 5 years being pretty tough because people weren't looking for this, I think it's also tough because, there really isn't a category of, visual understanding or creativity, non-bullshit making software. So we're trying to create the category, and that guy, he's created the category for sure.
That's awesome. All right. We got my last question. Those are all three people that I would love to meet with myself. Those are all people that are like obviously thought leaders in their space. So if I was to give you a winning $10 million lottery ticket, what would you do with it? Where would you spend the cash?
I'm very boring in this category. I would, I'm struggling to think of a more exciting answer to make this not boring, but my real answer is I would invest it very conservatively. I would have I'd include inflation and reinvest that every year so it never loses its value over time. And then whatever comes after, whatever comes on top of that in the year, I would, help my niece and nephew go to college, help my family. I've got, like I told you before, a really small family. So I think this is actually a doable thing. There's only like 11 of us total or something, right? So I think I could kind of take care of everyone if I played my cards right. So I think that's realistically what I'd do, but I'm a big fan of boats and helicopters. So if you want a really cool, exciting answer, maybe pretend I said that.
Yeah. We'll say helicopter. Well, but you're taking care of your family. There's nothing wrong with that. Like that's taking care of one of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So that they make sure everybody's all taken care of.
Exactly.
And so lastly, if anybody needs to get in contact with you, where can they obviously tell us about the website? If you want to give out your email address, give us the fun stuff.
Cool. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So Cortex can be found at meetcortex.com. Really easy, MEET, cortex.com. We're super active in responding. People can find us there. People can find me on LinkedIn. It's literally LinkedIn/in/Brennan White, the simplest thing possible. And I'm super active getting back to people, at least every couple of days, if not every day. And then, I'm on Twitter occasionally. I mostly just share stuff. I don't think people want to hear my opinion too much, but at Brenomics is my Twitter handle. So
nice.
All those are options.
Awesome. Well, Brennan White, man, thanks for being on the podcast today. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, make sure you guys subscribe to it. And Brennan, once again, man, thank you so much for being on the podcast, bud.
Thanks for having me. Really great talking to you today.
All right, man. We'll talk soon.